Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third and final part of our Peril at End House solve along. This is a solve along that I have been doing with my followers, in which we all try to guess whodunit in this Agatha Christie mystery. Today's video is going to discuss chapters 18 through the end of this book. So if you haven't finished Peril at End House yet and you don't want to be spoiled on who the murderer is, go finish the book first, and parts 1 and 2 of this solve along will be linked in the card if you haven't seen them yet. In the last video, I locked in my final guess that Nick Buckley was actually the one behind her cousin Maggie's murder and has been making herself look like the intended victim when actually she's not. So first, let's summarize what we read in this section, and then we'll see if I was correct. So as we discussed at the end of the last video, Nick has had seemingly a near brush with death due to eating a poisoned chocolate, and Poirot has decided that he is going to make everyone think that Nick is dead to see if that gets a reaction from the murderer, or if he can, catch somebody proceeding with their master plan. And at the start of this section, there is a part where Poirot is going over questions that he still has about all of the suspects. That's on page 189. And while Poirot and Hastings are in, I believe, their hotel room, Hastings sees what he describes as an inhuman face at the window. He sees somebody seemingly peering into their room, and this person scares him, whoever they are. So Maggie Buckley, Nick's cousin, was the murder victim in this book, and her mother actually forwards Poirot a letter that she received from Maggie. Maggie had just arrived in Cornwall right before her death, but apparently she did have time to put this one letter in the post to her mother, and Mrs. Buckley has sent it to Poirot, I guess just in case it can be of any use. In the letter, Maggie writes, quote, "I cannot see why she, meaning Nick, telegraphed for me in the way she did. Tuesday would have done just as well." And this started ringing alarm bells for me because seemingly Nick needed Maggie there with urgency. And one thing that I don't think I mentioned this in part 2. But after I filmed part 2, I was very confident about my theory. And I was talking with my mother, who has also been reading this book. And as we were talking, I did think, Nick, if she is the mastermind, she's really counting on a lot of things going right here. First, she seemingly doesn't even know for 100% sure that Michael Seton, who I believe was engaged to Maggie, is actually dead. What would she have done if he wasn't dead? Or if he was mistakenly reported as dead and then showed up alive? Because if my theory is correct and Maggie was actually the one engaged to Michael Seton, if Nick is trying to pass herself off as Michael Seton's fiance and he shows up alive after all, he is immediately going to say, yeah, I was not engaged to this woman. And I also mentioned before that seemingly Nick would have wanted to shoot Maggie during the fireworks because fireworks sound a lot like gunshots. So if anyone heard the shot, they would probably just assume it was a firework. However, these were pre-planned fireworks, so what would Nick have done if Maggie wasn't able to come that day or the train was delayed? She had a very small window of opportunity to actually execute this plan. Ooh, pun not intended. But when you read this excerpt from Maggie's letter, it lets you know that seemingly Nick telegraphed Maggie, conveying a real sense of urgency. She needed Maggie to get down there immediately. She couldn't take the train the next day. She needed her on Monday. Meanwhile, the lawyer, Charles Weiss, who also happens to be Nick's cousin on the other side of her family tree, he tells Poirot that, would you look at that? Nick's will has suddenly turned up after all. How convenient. Poirot also has a sudden epiphany, rereads Maggie's letter, and he's apparently come to some major realization. The only thing he needs to do is send a wire asking 2 very important questions. And since Nick's will has now seemingly turned up after being missing, Charles Weiss is going to hold a will reading, and all of our suspects are going to gather together at End House to find out what's in Nick's will. So everybody is there. Freddie Rice, Jim Lazarus, George Challenger, both Crofts, Ellen, the housekeeper, and her husband and her child. And the will, surprisingly, leaves everything to Mrs. Croft, claiming that Mrs. Croft once did Nick's late father a great service, and that's why Nick is leaving her everything. This woman who she just met, what, like 6 months ago? And interestingly, this will doesn't say what the supposed great service actually was. And Mrs. Croft is like, oh, I'll keep it a secret. Nick knew, and nobody else has to know. And I was just like, girl, sounds fake. Sounds fake, but okay. After that, there is a moment which I think might be my favorite moment in this entire book, where Poirot says, hey, since we're all gathered here together, why don't we have a seance to see if we can speak to Nick's spirit? You know, my friend Hastings, he has the ability to speak to the great beyond, and I was just imagining in my head Hastings' face when Poirot says that he has psychic powers that he actually does not have, and just the mental image of Hastings pretending to be a psychic medium, hilarious to me. I gotta watch the Poirot adaptation of this at some point, just for this scene alone. And so while they're having this seance, Nick, who is, of course, as we all know, not dead, comes in pretending to be a ghost and scares everybody. She confirms that this is not her will. She did not leave everything to Mrs. Croft. This will is a fake. And it turns out that Inspector Japp is also at End House. He's been hiding out until this moment, and he is here to arrest Mr. and Mrs. Croft, whose real names are not actually Croft. Mrs. Croft is actually named Millie Merton. The two of them are apparently forgers. They're using fake names. And actually, Mrs. Croft, or Mrs. Merton, whatever you want to call her, the reason she's currently disabled is because she was actually injured during their last great heist. So that suspicious train accident actually did come back into relevance in the end. And then, as if there's not enough going on already, at this point, I literally did a double take for a second. Somebody shoots Freddie Rice through the window. I literally had to reread this part. I was like, somebody just shot Freddie, but every single character in this book is in the room. Who shot her? But it turns out the man who shot Freddie is her estranged husband. Remember, we learned earlier that Freddie was in an abusive marriage, but she's not able to divorce her husband because she doesn't know where he is. Well, it turns out he's the one who just shot Freddie. He's also the inhuman face that Hastings saw through the window. Luckily for Freddie, the bullet just grazed her, so she is going to be fine, but the same can not be said of Mr. Rice, who, after shooting Freddie, has shot himself, and he apologizes to Freddie for all that he put her through before dying. And of course, with her husband now dead, this means that Freddie is single again and potentially free to marry her lover, Jim Lazarus. She also says that her husband was the one who got her hooked on drugs, and now she has almost weaned herself off of them. So, happy ending for Freddie and Jim? I mean, as happy as it can be after your abusive husband shows up again and tries to kill you. Obviously, that's very traumatic. I think it's also either mentioned or implied that Mr. Rice is the one who wrote that strange note the police found in the grass, but I didn't actually write that in my notes, so maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I think they mentioned that like he had been sending threatening messages to Freddie about their past. And at this point, Nick says, well, I guess that confirms it. Freddie's estranged husband must have been the one that shot Maggie. He was lurking around on the estate. He killed her. But you know what? I think that we should all agree to hush this whole thing up because we don't want poor Freddie to go through more trauma now, do we? Everybody agrees to this plan, says that it makes sense. There's a really funny moment where Mr. Croft says, I think that's a great idea. And Inspector Japp goes, Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you? Because, you know, he's the one who's going to be arrested. So, of course, he thinks it would be great if they could all lie about the truth. But there are two people who do not agree to this plan. Charles Weiss, who, as a lawyer, is very attached to the concept of law and order. And as for why Poirot does not approve of this plan, it's because he knows that the killer of Maggie Buckley was not Mr. Rice. It was actually, I'm not pointing in the right spot, Nick Buckley. She did it. Like, guys, we were right. We knew. Apparently, while he was hiding out, Jap actually witnessed Nick take the pistol that was used to kill Maggie, and she put it in Freddie's coat, seemingly intending to frame Freddie for the whole thing because she's always been jealous of Freddie, and so she wanted to pin the murders on her. That's where the whole thing about Jim formerly having a crush on Nick comes in. Apparently, Nick was really pissed off when Jim stopped liking her and started liking Freddie. I also totally forgot in part two to mention the supposed hidden compartment in End House that Ellen told Poirot about, and Nick was acting kind of cagey about when Poirot brought it up to her. It turns out that's where she's been hiding the gun this entire time, and so Jap witnesses her take it out of that hiding spot and put it in Freddie's coat. And as for why Nick killed her cousin Maggie, who seemingly nobody had any motive to kill, it's because Maggie's real name was also Magdala Buckley, and she was the one who was really engaged to Michael Seaton. Exactly as I said in the last video. I don't need to go over all of the details here because it was pretty much exactly as we discussed. Poirot realized this because of the line in Maggie's letter. In that line in Maggie's letter, she talked about how Tuesday would have done just as well. Poirot realized from this that Maggie was actually always intending to come on Tuesday, and Nick actually just asked her to come earlier. I was kind of a little confused by this. I was a little lost on the exact timeline, like what day of the week it was that the murder took place, but anyways. And also, one clue that I didn't even think of is that, so the whole reason that Nick had written a will was because she was getting her appendix taken out. And so she wanted to write this will just in case she died during surgery. This took place on February 27th. However, the love letters from Michael Seaton, one of them was written near the 27th, and he doesn't mention once being worried about his fiancée undergoing this surgery. And you would think if he actually was engaged to Nick, she would have told him that she was worried about this surgery, and he would have been concerned for her as any lover would. And so the fact that he said nothing about it helped Poirot realize that they were actually written to a different person. I thought that was a pretty clever clue. I didn't even notice that. And at the end, when Nick is being taken away for her crimes, she asks Freddie if she may have her watch for something to remember her by. Now, this watch, remember there was a very weird moment where George Challenger gave the watch back to Freddie, saying that he had had it repaired for her or something. Yeah, it turns out that George Challenger was actually Freddie and Nick's drug supplier. He was giving them cocaine because, due to his uncle being a doctor, he had access to a lot of drugs, and he was able to take some and give them to the girls. So the watch that he gave back to Freddie actually had cocaine stashed inside. And the implication is that Nick is asking Freddie for the watch with the cocaine in it so that while she's in jail, she can take a fatal overdose. And Poirot just lets her do that. He's going to let her commit suicide rather than go to prison. So, guys, we guessed correctly. Nick Buckley was behind it all. We guessed the mystery even before Poirot. So, go us. Ultimately, what did I think of Peril at End House? I didn't think it was a bad book by any means, and there were things that I did like about it, but I have to be honest, I'm very disappointed that I knew whodunit the entire time. And I think it probably would be a bottom tier Christie for me. Definitely not bad. So far, The Big Four is the only Agatha Christie book that I really didn't care for. So it is ahead of that one. but it is going to be a bottom tier Christie for me just because I was a little disappointed. I hope that you enjoyed playing detective and reading Peril at End House with me. Let me know what you thought of it. How do you think you would rate this one? And if you've watched this entire video and you want to show your support, why don't you leave a house emoji in the comment section? And if you want to watch another one of my trying to solve Agatha Christie videos, why don't you check out this one, the very first one that I ever filmed, where I tried to solve murder at the vicarage. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you had fun. I sure did, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.